I used to think there were only two kinds of children in the world: children who were born shining, and children who had to spend their whole lives standing in the spill of somebody else's light. For most of my childhood, I stood in Adrian, Lynn's. He lived next door, the only son of the family. My parents measured all human progress against. Adrian was the kind of boy who made adults lower their voices. At 9, he won city math competitions so easily that teachers joked he must have swallowed a calculator. At 12, he built a weather station from discarded radio parts and old glass jars. At 15, he was the face on the school website, the headline under every principal's speech, the proof that genius could wear a neat uniform and still look bored. And I was Nora Hahn, the girl whose report cards were always introduced with a sigh. To be fair, I was not a bad student. I simply had the poor luck of being ordinary in a house that had fallen in love with miracles. I worked harder than anyone in my class. I copied formulas until the edges of my fingers grew shiny with graphite. I read history under my blanket with a flashlight and memorized chemistry charts on the bus. I ranked high, enough for neighbors to praise me politely, and low enough for my parents to use me as a warning. Look at Adrian, my father would say when I got a 92 and not a 98. Look at Adrian, my mother would say when I spent an hour sketching labels in the margins of my notebook.
Look at Adrian, they both said so often that
his name stopped sounding like a person and became a ruler held against my neck. Well, that Adrian was never cruel. Cruelty would have been easier. If he laughed at me, I could have hated him cleanly, like a villain in the story. But Adrian was annoyingly impossibly decent. When we were little, he fixed a chain on my bicycle and handed back without calling. Attended to grease on my hands. In middle school, he once walked me through the rain because my umbrella had snapped. In high school, when my classmates joked, I studied like a machine and still second. To him, he told them very calmly that second place behind him was first place on mortals, and that they should try to be useful instead of loud. That should have made me grateful. Instead, it made me furious. Because every kindness from him became another thing my parents used against me. Why could not I be more relaxed like Adrian? Why was I always so tense? Why could not I be more inventive like Adrian? Why did I spend so much time making little paper mock-ups in hand, lettered title cards, if none of that would get me into a better future? They never understood that the things they dismissed were the only things that made me feel alive. While other students' self-practice tests were fun, I loved arranging gradations of made. Emotional sense, I loved the shape of letters, the weight of paper, the way a room changed. When you place light in the right corner and color in the right proportion, I loved museums, old books, train station apps, shop, signs from previous decades, and the tiny decisions that made strangers feel oriented instead of lost. When my classmates threw away packaging, I studied it. When teachers assigned presentations, mine always looked better than they had any right to. Pretty things won't save your life, my mother told me once after finding a drawer full of ticket stubs, catalog cutouts, and typography sketches I had arranged by era and color. But ugly things had never saved me either. By the time I got into university, I had perfected a face that looked obedient from a distance. I chose visual communication and exhibition design, which my parents considered a compromise bordering on failure. They had wanted medicine, law, engineering, anything that could be explained proudly over dinner. Design to them was what happened when a clever child went soft in the head. Adrian, of course, made national news that same year. He did not simply enter university. He arrived. There the way storms arrive, with forecasts, excitement, and after effects. Prestigious. Professors competed for him. Publications quoted him before he was old enough to drink. His research and computational modeling spread through the local papers, and relatives I had not seen in years began calling my parents to say how lucky they were to live next to greatness. They said this to the wrong house. Because every article about Adrian came into our kitchen like a knife wrapped in velvet. My father would leave the newspaper open on the table with Adrian's photograph turned toward me while I ate breakfast. My mother would read paragraphs aloud while I tied my hair for class, pausing only to ask, "Do you see how far ahead he is at your age?" At first I fought, then I argued, then I cried. In the bathroom and came out with my face washed clean. By the third year of university, I learned a better strategy: absence. I stopped coming home except when absolutely necessary. I took freelance layout work, designed festival brochures, cataloged archival boxes for a local library, and saved every spare note as if money were a raft, and distance the only shore. I missed one departmental scholarship by a single point and did not tell my parents. When they found out, anyway, and called me wasteful, lazy, and embarrassingly mediocre, something inside me became very still. That stillness was not peace. It was the sound a bridge makes just before it admits it has been carrying too much weight for too long. After graduation, I moved to Harbor City with 2 suitcases, a second-hand kettle, and no intention of returning. The room I rented was small enough that I could switch off the kitchen light from my bed. With a broom handle, the walls sweated in summer and held the cold in winter. The elevator in the building worked according to principles known only to itself and perhaps a vindictive God. But the room was mine. The silence was mine. The bad instant noodles I ate at midnight while correcting display text for clients who misspelled their own names were mine. I found work first as a junior exhibition assistant, then as a layout coordinator for a cultural center that was always underfunded and somehow always mounting impossible shows. I learned how to make old photographs look dignified under cheap lighting. I learned how to stretch budgets until they resembled miracles. I learned how to tell stories with floor plans and labels and the distance between 2 objects in a glass case. Most importantly, I learned how to build a
life no one at home had approved of.
My parents hated it. They called in waves. At first there was outrage, then guilt, then tears, then practical threats about aging, shame, and what neighbors would think. When that failed, they attempted nostalgia as if childhood had been something they and I had both enjoyed. I sent money every month because poverty should never become another excuse for control, but I stopped answering most calls. Years passed in this half-peace. Then my grandmother died. She had been my father's mother, and the only person in that entire town who had ever looked at me without evaluation. When I was 13, and my mother threw away my hand-bound paper notebook because it was junk, my grandmother had quietly taken me to the market the next day and bought me thread, cardstock, and 2 small carving knives for linoleum stamps. People who make things, she told me, wrapping them in newspaper, must learn early not to ask permission from people who fear imagination. Her funeral was the first thing strong enough to drag me back. I returned in winter, expecting grief and old suffocation. I was not prepared for the shop. My grandma owned a tiny store on little leaf rackets. People still called it a shop, though I sold more exercise books, wrapping paper, red, envelopes, and school labels than anything else. It sat on a narrow street between a noodle stand and a sugar with faded wood shelves and hand design. So beautiful. I nearly cried when I saw it. Again, the shop smelled of dust, glue, and old paper. Behind the counter, tucked indoors, and metal tins were treasures, stamp blocks, outdated alphabets, half-used ink, brass, rulers, tape punches, label guns, and sacks of sample card colors no modifier, author making. I had thought I would come back, sign what needed signing, and leave. Instead, I found a place that looked like the inside of my own mind. My father wanted to sell it immediately to a developer who had been buying up the lane one unit at a time. It is worthless now, he said on the second day after the funeral, standing in the center of the shop as if its emptiness proved his point. Take the money and be done with it. Your grandmother held on to rubbish because she was sentimental. Sentiment does not pay rent. I was on a ladder, wiping dust from a strip of old hanging type when I answered him. Then why are you in such a hurry to sell? Something worthless. He stared at me like he had forgotten I was capable of speech that did not apologize. Because he did not have an answer that would make him look good, he defaulted to the old one. Look at Adrian, he snapped. He is built. Something real. He does not waste time on old paper and dead businesses. If he had this chance, he would know what to do. The name hit me exactly as it had when I was 17, 20, and 23. Like a match dropped into a room that already smelled of gas. I climbed down the ladder slowly, set the rag on the counter, and said, if Adrian wants the shop, he can buy it himself. Until then, stop. Offering him as a solution to problems he did not create, my father opened and closed his mouth twice. My mother, who had come in halfway through, immediately clutched at her chest as if my tone had physically struck her. You left for years and came back with no manners, she said. Harbor City taught you nothing except arrogance. No, I said. It taught me that I do not have to stay in rooms where you use other people's names like weapons. Then, because fate has a vicious sense of timing, the bell over the shop door rang, and Adrian walked in. If I had been the kind of person who believed in messages from the universe, I would have taken that as one, leave now or be forced to. Relive every humiliation that ever shaped you. Adrian looked different. Not older exactly, though he was. Not simply. Thinner, though he was that too. The real change was in the pace of him. The Adrian I remembered had moved like a person always a few seconds ahead of the rest of the world. This one paused before entering, as if bracing for weather. His hair was longer than before, tied badly at the nape of his neck, and the shadows under his eyes did not look temporary. He wore a dark coat and carried a flat portfolio case tucked under one arm. My mother brightened instantly, which told me she had known he might come. Adrian, she said with the unmistakable tone of a woman greeting a son she wished she had. You picked the worst possible moment. Nora is in one of her moods. He barely glanced at her. His eyes went first to me, then to the dusty shelves, then to the old sign above the counter. I heard about Grandma Han, he said softly. I'm sorry. There were a dozen responses available. I chose the coldest. Thank you. The condolences counter is by the door. My father muttered my name in warning. Adrian. Ignored him and set the portfolio case on the counter. I came because I heard the developer made an offer, he said. Before you sign anything, you should look at what is inside the walls. That sentence was bizarre enough to interrupt even my mother's indignation. What do you mean inside the walls, she asked. Adrian opened the case and spread out old municipal plans, utility sketches, and 3 photographs across the counter. The lane is on a protected heritage shortlist. Nothing official yet, but there's a review underway. If the review passes, demolition stops. Renovation grants become possible. Also, he tapped one photo. There's a hidden mezzanine above the rear storage room. It was boarded over in the 80s. If this becomes a studio, archive, or educational space, the footprint matters. For a moment, no one said anything. I stared at the photo. He was right. Behind the peeling plaster and old shelves was the outline of a stair that had been sealed off decades ago. "How do you know this?" I asked. He gave a strange little shrug, almost embarrassed. "I have been researching Willow Lane for a community preservation proposal." "Of course you have," my father said, half mocking and half admiring. "You research one thing and accidentally save another. That is Adrian for you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I rolled up the municipal plan and said, "Fine. Thank you for the information. You can go." Adrian did not move. "I also came because I want to make you a proposal," he said. "No. You have not heard it. I do not need to. The answer is still no." His mouth tightened. "Nora? Don't." I held up one hand. If this is another version of pity disguised as opportunity, save it. I am not joining a genius boy's charity project so he can feel better about the wreckage orbiting him. The silence that followed was not the embarrassed kind. It was sharp. My mother looked delighted that I had made myself look unreasonable in front of him. My father looked horrified. Adrian looked for one flash of a second genuinely wounded. Then he said, very quietly, "I am not here to rescue you. I'm here because you are the only person I know who could make this place become what it deserves to be." That should not have mattered. It mattered anyway. I hated that. Because all my life Adrian had been the benchmark before which my efforts shrank. And now he was standing in the middle of my grandmother's shop surrounded by dust and old stock, saying something dangerously close to respect. So I did what I always did when something frightened me by feeling too much like hope. I made it procedural. "Email the proposal," I said. "If it is stupid, I will ignore it. If it is condescending, I will print it and burn it. If by some miracle it is neither, I will consider reading past page 1. Then I turned away and climbed the ladder. Again, a clear dismissal. He left without saying goodbye. That night, in the room I had rented for the week because I refused to sleep in my parents' house, I opened his email. The proposal was not stupid. Worse, it was excellent. Adrian wanted to convert the shop into a hybrid space, part studio, part reading room, part design lab for educational materials. He had been developing an accessibility platform for students with reading difficulties, adaptive text interfaces, tactile learning tools, and modular visual systems that could help children overwhelmed by standard classroom formats. What he lacked was someone who understood the physical experience of materials, signage, sequence, and visual trust. In other words, he lacked exactly the kind of mind I spent years being told was decorative and practical. He had not offered me a supporting role. He had offered me co-authorship. I did not sleep much. The next morning, I went to the shop before sunrise and pried open the rear storage wall. With a crowbar borrowed from the shoe repairman, after 40 minutes of dust, splinters, and a great deal of swearing, I found the sealed stair. By the time Adrian arrived, because of course, he had the nerve to arrive, the back of my sweater was soaked with sweat and my hands were gray with plaster. He took one look at the exposed stair and smiled with such startled, delighted boyishness that I almost forgot to be angry. "You read it?" he said. "I attacked a wall," I corrected. "That is not the same as agreement." "No," he said, "but it is not refusal either." That was the beginning, not of romance. I would have laughed in the face of anyone who suggested it then. It was the beginning of work. These next thing, measuring photographing and cataloging the shop. On the mezzanine, we found old typefaces, ledgers, printed marks, and 3D attachments of the first 10 years ago. I discovered that when Adrian was seeking almost certainly obedient to construction, I told him, wait silently until later, because I was not Steven. When great knowledge went, and he didn't touch complete. If I said we knew how this era, window construction natural light, room glass layer, he would. If I rejected the palette for each year, or if I was looking at one metal, he still as or mathematical. For the first time in my life, the things I saw intuitively were being treated as expertise instead of ornament. It changed something chemical in me. Not all at once. Not enough to feel safe, but enough to make breathing easier. Adrian, meanwhile, began to become legible. He was not, as my parents had always implied, gliding through life untouched by consequence. He had left a prestigious lab 6 months. Earlier, after collapse so severe he lost consciousness in front of a lecture hall, he had been living back in town temporarily, consulting remotely and doing community work, while deciding whether he still wanted the version of success everyone admired. The newspapers had called it a sabbatical. He called it finding out what remains when applause stops.
One evening, while we were eating takeaway, noodles on the mezzanine floor, amid boxes of unsorted paper, I asked, why did not I hear any of that from home? He laughed without humor, because if your parents admitted I was falling apart, they would have to stop using me as a myth. That sentence sat between us like a third person. I hated you for years, I said before I could stop myself. I know. No, I mean really hated you. I hated how easy everything looked. I hated how they said your name. I hated that you defended me just enough to look kind and never enough to stop anything. He put his chopsticks down.
That last part is fair, he said.
I thought I was helping. I was a coward. I waited. He looked at his hands when he spoke again.
I knew your parents compared you to me. I did not know the full extent until later, and by then I would already become part of the machinery. If I protested too hard, they treated it like proof that I was noble and you should be more grateful. If I pulled away, they blamed you for damaging a good relationship. So I tried to reduce impact without understanding the structure. That is not virtue. That is incompetence with clean intentions.
I had never heard anyone describe their own
failure so precisely.
It did not erase the past, but it prevented me from flattening him into the one shape I knew how to reject. There were setbacks.
The developer increased pressure when rumors spread that the Heritage Review might freeze. The lane. My father called me irresponsible, ungrateful, and naive enough to gamble real money on paper and nostalgia. My mother said I was only staying because Adrian was there, which was almost funny because at that point, my entire day consisted of telling Adrian no fewer than 6 times to stop buying specialty coffee for a shop that did not yet have running hot water upstairs.
There were also quieter difficulties.
Children did not trust new spaces immediately. The first open workshop we ran bookbinding for middle school students was attended by exactly 4 people, one of whom had only come because she thought there would be free snacks. Another spent the first 20 minutes insisting she was bad at everything artistic. Her name was Lena. She was 13, sharp faced and perpetually looking apologetic for taking up oxygen.
When I showed her how to fold signatures, punch sewing holes, and bind a simple notebook with blue thread, she kept saying, mine is crooked. Yours looks right. I ruined things. Adrian, who was helping 2 boys build cardboard letter forms in the corner, glanced over and opened his mouth to say something encouraging. I stopped him with a look. Then I leaned toward Lena and said, do you know what the difference is between a handmade object and a machine-made one? She shook her head. Evidence of a person, I said. Crooked does. Not mean ruined. Crooked means someone was. Here, she stared at the notebook in her hands for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was tiny, but it was there. That night, when we were closing up, Adrian said, you do that all the time. Do what? Take the sentence someone has been using too, wound themselves and turn it so it points to a door instead. I pretended to be busy locking the display case. That sounds suspiciously poetic for a man who once optimized rainfall models for fun. I contain multitudes, he said solemnly. I snorted. It may have been the first time I laughed around him without defensiveness. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He did not mention it. Of course he did not.
Instead, he brought me a folded printout the next day, grant applications for community, heritage and literacy innovation projects. He had marked sections, left sticky notes, and highlighted lines where our combined proposal could qualify for a funding bracket much larger than I had imagined.
Don't tell me you filled them out already, I said. No, he replied. I merely built a structure. In case you wanted to stop pretending this is temporary. I hated when he was right. I hated it even more when being right made him useful. So I said yes to the grant. Preparing for it turned the shop into a living thing.
I said these sense of not sneak and sterile, but warming red moss, green paper cream, with those things. Touch often. Adrian translated my instincts. Into budgets, professional typical. Language strategies trust. I wrote, workshop plans for children, adults, and older. Residents who wanted to their family. Letters. He built demonstration prototypes for tactile read and modern site, where the exchange becomes your need. We argued about terminology, about whether clarity and beauty were rival siblings, about whether fish is delicious or welcoming. The answer, we eventually discovered both, but only if one never. Devour the other.
Somewhere in the middle of that work, my anger toward him stopped being the main weather system of my mind. That terrified me more than hating him ever had. Because hatred is stable, hatred requires nothing except memory. Respect, unfortunately, has momentum. My parents sensed the shift before I did. They came to the shop together one afternoon, which meant they wanted either to perform concern or deliver a demand impossible to meet. It was both. We heard about the grant presentation, my mother said, glancing around as if the shelves themselves offended her. Adrian will present.
Of course.
Why, of course, I asked.
My father looked at me as though I had challenged gravity because he is Adrian. He speaks well, looks credible, and knows how to handle important people. I was behind the counter, trimming sample cards for our display folders. Adrian was upstairs, calibrating an e-ink demo board. I set the metal ruler down very carefully. And what? I asked. Am I for? My mother laughed lightly, the way people do when they think a question is too silly to answer honestly. You are involved, she said. That is already
Generous.
Don't make this ugly by insisting on the spotlight. Something old and volcanic moved in me. All those years I had accepted second place. Before the race began, all those times I had made myself small in rooms where smallness was rewarded with less immediate pain. All those careful compromises with invisibility, and suddenly, because of a print shop and a staircase and a difficult, brilliant man who took my eyes seriously, I was too tired to perform that old self any longer. No, I said. My father frowned.
No what?
No, he will not present instead of me.
No, I
Will not step aside to make things more comfortable for your sense of order. No, you do not get to use him as a passport while treating me like luggage. My mother's face sharpened. You have become rude. No, I said again. I have become audible. Adrian chose that moment to come down the
Stairs?
He took in the scene once their posture, my expression, the ruler on the counter, and immediately understood enough.
What is happening? He asked.
My father turned to him with the relief of a man certain another adult would restore the natural hierarchy. Adrian, talk some sense into her. She thinks she should be the lead presenter. Adrian's expression changed so subtly only someone looking directly at him would have
Noticed.
The warmth went out first, then the softness. What remained was something very clear. She should, he said. My mother blinked.
What?
She should lead the presentation. He repeated. The project exists in a form worth funding because Nora built its language, spatial logic, and educational design. If I speak, I will handle the technical questions. But if you mean who should stand first, introduce the vision and answer why it matters, Nora.
The silence that followed was exquisite. My father, who had spent decades believing Adrian's existence justified every insult he ever flung at me, now had the extraordinary experience of being contradicted by his own chosen saint. He turned red so quickly it was almost artistic. You do not understand family matters, he said. Adrian smiled, and for once there was nothing gentle in it. No, he said. I understand them perfectly. I have been your favorite instrument for years. It was, I admit, deeply satisfying. They left in outrage. I did not stop smiling for an hour. The night before the grant presentation, I did not sleep at all. Not because I was unprepared. I knew the slides. I knew the space model, the workshop, structure, the cost breakdown, the projected community impact. I could have delivered the talk in my sleep. I just had not yet convinced the part of me that remembered the kitchen table and the newspaper and the phrase, "Look at Adrian," that I was allowed to stand in front of a room and ask to be believed. At 2 a.m, I found Adrian in the shop testing projector brightness against handmade sample boards. You also can't sleep, he asked. I can sleep. I am merely aggressively choosing consciousness. He nodded.
Healthy.
I sat on the floor among rolled prints and extension cords. After a minute, I said, "What if they look at
me and see exactly what my parents see?"
He was silent long enough that I almost regretted speaking. Then he crouched in front of me, forearms resting loosely on his knees.
Nora, he said, your parents see according to a script that requires you to fail. Investors see according to risk and value. Children see according to whether a room is kind. Older people see according to whether memory is handled with respect. I see according to whether something is true.
Those
Are 4 different visions. Only one of them has spent years training itself to miss who you are.
When he said things like that, I understood why other people mistook precision for magic. I do not know how to stop being afraid. I admitted. He considered this. Maybe do not stop, he said. Just let fear come to the presentation. Like everyone else, it can sit in the back and keep its mouth shut while you work. I laughed despite myself. Then he did something I remembered for a long time after. He took a marker, turned over the cardboard, backing from a discarded paper pack, and wrote, in block letters, evidence of a person. He said it beside me. In case you forget, he said. The presentation took place in a municipal conference hall with terrible acoustics and better coffee than expected. I wore dark trousers, a cream blouse, and my grandmother's old silver ring. Adrian wore charcoal and looked, as always, like he had been born knowing how to stand under institutional lighting without becoming strange.
3 other teams presented before us. One had an impressive app and no understanding of actual users. Another wanted to turn a courtyard into an immersive interactive zone, which appeared to mean expensive screens no one would maintain. The third had excellent intentions and catastrophic typography.
When our turn came, my hands were shaking. I walked to the front anyway. I did not begin with data. I began with a room. I want to talk to you, I said, about the difference between information that is available and information that is actually
Reachable.
Then I told them about children who leave libraries because they think difficulty means inadequacy. About older residents with boxes of letters no one in the family can read anymore because the handwriting paper, conventions, and context have become foreign. About the loneliness of spaces that are technically open and emotionally closed. About what happens when a print shop becomes not a nostalgic object but a place where text, memory, and learning are made tactile again.
I spoke for 12 minutes. During questions, one investor asked Adrian why he had chosen to work with someone from an arts background rather than another. Technical lead. He looked at the man for one heartbeat too. Long then answered, because readability is not only a technical problem, trust is not only a technical problem. If you build tools people can use but cannot emotionally enter, you have built elegant exclusion. Nora designs entry. Something in the room changed after that. By the time we left, I could not feel my feet. We did not celebrate immediately. We were too emptied out to perform joy on command. Instead, we walked back to the shop in the late afternoon light, bought buns from the corner stall, and sat on the front steps eating in silence. At dusk, the email arrived. We got the grant. Not partial funding. Full funding. I read the number 3 times before it. Settled into reality. Adrian took the phone from my hand, read it. Himself, then very unlike him, laughed out.
Loud.
A real laugh. Not the small one he used when being dry. This one startled birds off. The electric line. Then he looked at me with such open brightness that for one unstable second I understood how people fell in love at unreasonable speeds. I stood up at once and turned away because I was not interested in having that thought examined. He let me have the moment. Then he said softly, "You did it."
Not we.
Not you and I.
Not the project.
You? I wish I could say that was the moment. Everything inside me resolved elegantly into confidence. It was not. Healing would have made a very poor grant.
Announcement.
My parents did not become wiser because public funding validated what they had mocked. They became strategic. My father began telling relatives he had always known I had some talent in this direction. My mother complained that I never gave them credit for my resilience. When I refused to let them attach themselves to the success of the shop, they called me vindictive.
There was one last fracture still waiting. A week before we signed the final renovation paperwork, I went through the last cabinet in the mezzanine and found an envelope addressed in my grandmother's hand. Inside was a certificate from a national high school design competition. First prize. My name.
I stared at it for a full minute before my memory caught up. I had entered that competition at 17 with a public signage, system designed for small town clinics, color, coded wayfinding, icon-supported instructions, and patient-friendly forms. I remembered never hearing back. I remembered assuming I had lost.
There was also a note. Your father took this from the mailbox and said it would put foolish ideas in your head. I took it from his desk because foolish ideas built half the world worth living in. If you find this one day, let it do its work. Belatedly, I sat on the floor and cried so hard I scared the cat from the windowsill. Adrian found me there. He did not ask what was wrong. He read the certificate lying in my lap and understood. Enough. After a while, he sat beside me.
They knew, I said.
My voice sounded wrong, even to me. They knew and buried it. They let me believe I imagined my own ability. He answered carefully. People who require your dependence often hide evidence of your capacity. That sentence did not comfort me. It steadied me. When the tears stopped, I folded the certificate, put it back in the envelope, and said, I'm done. With them? With needing anything from them that they are too damaged to give. He nodded. Then, after a pause, he asked, and with me, I turned to look at him fully. He did not seem triumphant. He seemed afraid. For all his brilliance, that still startled me. Sometimes that he could look afraid of me. I do not know yet, I said honestly. He accepted that. Because he always had underneath everything. I had been too busy treating him as the carrier of my wounds to notice how consistently he had accepted uncertainty when it was mine. The renovation took 4 months.
Children came first, then teenagers, then older residents, then teachers asking if we could help with visual supports for students who froze at desk worksheets. The mezzanine became a quiet reading loft with adjustable lamps and deep chairs prepared from local theater storage. The front room held print tables, display panels, and a rotating exhibition wall. One side room became Adrian's testing lab for prototypes. The other became a material archive and design studio with drawers labeled in my own hand.
We named the place Borrowed Light Press. It was my title. Adrian argued for it immediately. Because that is what most people think they are. Living in, I told him while painting the sign. Mock-up. Borrowed light, borrowed authority, borrowed permission. The trick is realizing light does not become less yours because you first learned how to see it reflected. He leaned against the counter, watching me. Letter, the curves. And after that, he asked. After that, I said, you stop apologizing for becoming luminous. He smiled in that quiet way of his that never asked to be admired.
The opening day was crowded enough to make movement difficult and wonderful. Lena came with 2 friends and showed them the notebook. She had since filled with poems. The boys from our first workshop dragged their parents upstairs to prove they had built the cardboard letter installation. My grandmother's old. Customers cried over preserved receipt books and name stamps. 3 teachers asked about the tactile kits. A city official mispronounced the shop name and then bought 6 custom journals out of embarrassment.
Late in the afternoon, my parents arrived. I had half expected them not to, but vanity is a persistent engine. They stood just inside the doorway, dressed more carefully than the occasion required, already carrying the posture of people, prepared to be seen near success. My mother looked around and said, with uncanny instinct for the wrong note, it is smaller than I expected. My father went straight to the framed grant.
Notice on the sidewall.
You should have put the amount higher, he said. People notice.
Numbers.
I felt almost nothing. That, more than anger, told me I was finally somewhere new. I walked to the counter, picked up the printed family and press policy I had made, specifically for this possibility, and handed it to them.
What is this? My mother asked.
Boundary guidelines, I said. My father laughed. Don't be ridiculous. I am not. You are welcome here if you behave like guests. You are not welcome here if you behave like owners, critics, or historians. Revising the past. My mother's eyes flashed. Are you threatening your own parents in public? No, I said. I'm finally telling the truth. Where witnesses exist, around us the room had not gone silent. Exactly. But conversation had thinned. My father lowered his voice.
You think this?
Little shop makes you important. I met his gaze and answered with a calm I had once believed belonged only to other people. No, I think the years you spent trying to convince me I was not important failed. He had no language for that. People like my father understand obedience, rebellion, and shame. They do not understand the composure of a child who has buried the need for their recognition and planted something more durable in its place. My mother tried one last weapon. If Adrian had not helped you, Adrian, who had been in the back room, calibrating a display screen, chose that instant to step back into view. She stopped. He looked from them to me, read the atmosphere, and set the toolkit down. Then he said, in the clearest voice I had ever heard him use indoors, if Nora had not accepted my help, this place would not exist. If she had not led, I would still be building clever things no one knew how to enter. Don't confuse proximity to her work with participation in it. It was not dramatic. He did not raise his
voice.
He simply removed their last possible fiction and laid it on the floor. They left 5 minutes later. I did not watch them go. That night, after everyone had gone home and the cat had reclaimed the warm spot under the reading table, Adrian and I locked the front door together. We were both too tired to speak at first. The lane outside was mostly dark. Only the noodle stand still had lights on. I sat on the front step. He sat beside me. Between us, the silence felt neither strained nor hungry, just inhabited. After a while, he said, there is something I want to ask, and I do not want to ask it.
Badly.
You usually ask things very annoyingly, not
Badly.
He smiled. Cruel.
Accurate.
He took a breath. I know I am tied to too much of what hurt.
You, he said.
I know affection does not erase architecture. I know wanting something is not the same as deserving it. I went very still. He continued, slower now. But I also know that the person I am beside you is more honest than the person I learned to be under everyone else's expectations. And I think maybe the person you're beside me is less alone than the person who first came back to this town. I looked at my hands. Paper cuts.
Ink stains.
My grandmother's ring, evidence of a person. So, he said, not today, not as payment for history, not because I stayed, not because you.
Allay me curiosity.
Just as a question, is there any version of the future in which I am allowed to try for real? The old instinct in me wanted either total refusal or defensive joke, simpler shapes, cleaner exits, but the truth had become more complicated and therefore more useful. Yes, I said. He turned sharply enough that I laughed. Then I added, on one condition. His face changed so quickly from hope to caution, it was almost theatrical.
Name it.
No more offering yourself as a solution to my
Life, I said.
No more acting like love means repairing me by force of cleverness. If there is a future, it has to be one in which we each arrive as ourselves. He nodded immediately.
Done.
And I said, because now that I had started, I might as well be ruthless. If you ever let
My parents use your name like that again.
we'll replace all your expensive pens with free bank pens until you beg for death. He actually laughed. That, he said, seems fair. I leaned back on my hands and looked up at the lane, the sign, the upper window of the shop, where warm light still glowed through paper. Shades. For years I had thought the best possible ending was escape. I still believe in escape. Some doors must be run through, not discussed. But there are other endings too.
There's the ending in which a room once used to diminish you becomes a sight of your own. Vocabulary. There's the ending in which the saint your parents worship steps down and becomes only a man brilliant, flawed, stubborn, scared, trying. There's the ending in which the work you were told is decorative becomes a thing that lets other people find their way through fear. There's the ending in which a girl raised in comparison stops living, like a footnote, and begins quietly, deliberately writing headlines of her own, making.
I used to think there were only children born, shining and children left in borrowed light. I know better now. Some of us become luminous by studying every shadow too closely to be fooled by it again. And when we finally learn how, we do not merely glow. We build rooms where others can see